In this lesson, you're going to learn how to calculate the return, the IRR, internal rate of return, in an LBO model. Now, the reason this is so important, going back to our house analogy in the beginning, is that if you go and buy a house for $500,000 and then sell it for $600,000 after paying off a certain amount of debt each year, as we assumed above when we went through this analogy, it's fine that you're doing this, but ultimately at the end, any type of real estate investor or anyone who is selling their house at some point in the future cares about one thing, which is when you take the sale price of the house and you divide it by how much you paid originally, what is your return? Is it going to be 1.2 times? Is it going to be 3 times? Is it going to be 4 times? And so the return calculation is critical whether you're purchasing and selling a house or you're buying and selling a company as a PE firm would do in a leveraged buyout. So to calculate this, the first step here is to figure out how much in cash the PE firm is actually putting down. And then in year 5, when they sell the company or when they take it public again, how much are they actually getting back? So we're going to start in 2009 by pulling in some of our baseline assumptions right here. So EBITDA, we are just going to go and get this from Apple's income statement right here. The purchase enterprise value, we're going to go all the way up to the top, take enterprise value from here. For the EBITDA multiple, we can just take enterprise value divided by EBITDA, or we could link in from the top once again. And this is just giving us some baseline assumptions to work with so we can see how the company changes over 5 years. Now for the investor equity here, remember what we want to do, going back to our sources and uses schedule, is we want to go and pull in this investor equity number right here. We do not want to take the equity value of the company or try to work backwards and subtract cash, add debt, or anything like that when we're going between enterprise value and investor equity here. And that's because investor equity and equity value are different concepts entirely. So in this case, we want to get the investor equity. So in other words, the down payment the PE firm made, how much are they paying out of their own cash as opposed to debt? So we'll pull in that number. I'm going to actually make this a negative. We're going to need this because of the way Excel does the return calculations. Now for year 5, what we're going to do is once again take EBITDA from Apple's income statement, and we're assuming in these examples that Apple is being sold on a multiple of EBITDA, which is reasonable for a technology company like this. If we were working in a different industry, we might use a different multiple, but most of the time in LBO models, you're going to be working off of EBITDA. Now for the EBITDA multiple, remember that all the way at the top, under our transaction assumptions, we'd assume 10x for our EBITDA exit multiple. So we'll link that in. Now for the enterprise value here, remember that the EBITDA multiple times EBITDA will give us that number. So we'll just take EBITDA times the multiple of 10 here. We get around 250 billion for our exit enterprise value. It may not seem like a lot, especially compared to the 2009 number. It doesn't seem like it's gone up by that much. But keep in mind that we've actually only put down 100 million or around 106 million to buy this company in the first place. So in all likelihood, we are going to get significantly more than that back at the end of this 5-year period. So to calculate how much in equity value the investors actually get back here, what we're going to do is take our enterprise value, and remember that when we're going from enterprise value to equity value, we subtract debt and add cash. It's the opposite of going from equity value to enterprise value. So we're going to take enterprise value and then add our ending cash balance here. But remember that we also have, back in our 3-statement model, there's short-term and long-term securities, so we need to add those as well. So we'll just go to year 5 for the short-term securities and for the long-term securities. So we have those, and then we want to subtract our debt, so our ending debt balances, 26 billion and around 26 or 27 billion right here for the high yield debt. And so that gives us how much in cash the PE firm is actually going to receive when they go and sell Apple. We have to assume that the debt is going to be repaid here, which is why we're subtracting it, but we're adding in the cash numbers because those come as an added bonus for the company having generated cash flow and cash over this time period. Now the final step here, remember that we're modeling out the cash flows of this investor, this PE firm, what they could actually expect. So they have a negative cash flow in year 1 because they're buying the company, and then a positive cash flow in year 5 when they sell the company. But in between, we also need to take into account what happens. And in this case, we're going to say 0 for all these years. The reason is because they're receiving no cash flow from the company from any sources in these 4 years in between. It's only the beginning year and then the ending year when they actually get cash flow from this. And the reason we have to do this is because one of the quirks with Excel's returns calculation function is that if you do not have these numbers in between, it will not work correctly. So whenever you're making a calculation like this, an IRR calculation, then you need to include some type of 0 number in between, otherwise the calculation will not work properly. So to actually make this calculation now, we're going to enter the IRR function. IRR stands for, as you can see right here, the internal rate of return for a series of cash flows. And that's exactly what we have right here. This is actually very similar to the discounted cash flow analysis, where we calculated the present value of free cash flow. We're using a similar concept here, except unlike the DCF analysis, where we actually went in and calculated the present value ourselves and summed up everything here, for our LBO model, we're going to rely on the built-in functions within Excel to do the work for us. So I'm going to say IRR and then use the Shift key to select multiple cells and go all the way across. We see it comes out to 16.7% for this particular transaction. So this tells us that the PE firm investing in Apple, assuming that it gets sold at a multiple of 10x, and assuming that it pays off the debt, as we have shown right here, can expect around a 16 or 17% return at the end of the period, which is not great, not spectacular, but probably enough to actually get a deal done in this case. Usually PE firms will aim for a 20 to 25% return or higher than that if possible. 15 to 20% can be okay, but usually they try to aim higher than that. Now, if it's a really attractive deal for other reasons, then maybe they'll still do it. And the fact is, it's really hard to tell exactly what the return is going to be, which is why we have to do sensitivity tables and look at other scenarios, look at other possible returns on this deal. But at the very least, from doing this basic calculation, we can see that the deal is at least feasible. If this came out to 2% or 3%, let's say, then we could just immediately look at this and say, okay, there's no way an investor is ever going to go for this because even under reasonable assumptions, there's no way they can get a solid return here. So coming up next, we're going to get into what I just alluded to, which is looking at sensitivity tables for this analysis to look at what the return might look like under different scenarios. So if the EBITDA exit multiple is different, if the purchase price is different, if the leverage ratio, the amount of leverage they're using to buy the company, the amount of debt they're using to buy the company is different, how would the return of this PE firm on buying Apple, how would that return actually be affected?